welcome to the Next Best Picture podcast, where I am being joined right now by the director and writer for the film Sovereign, Christian Swegal. Christian, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
So, this film is really disturbing. I feel like every now and then I'll come across a movie like this a couple times a year. It's not like even once a year. It's films that are touching upon similar subject matter in our contemporary times and speaking to an ideology that is not only felt across the country, but is also, I think, growing rather rapidly. And in many ways, I view films like Sovereign to be a cautionary tale and also a call to action as well. And with this particular story, I know that this is based upon real events here. Jerry Joe Kane, played here by Nick Offerman and Jacob Tromble. How did the story come to your attention first?
I've always been interested in the subject matter. I've always been interested in these fringe ideologies and how they sort of, have always existed in America and American subcultures, but really with the internet are now proliferating and, just kind of getting more and more common. So I'd always been interested in the subject, and I had a personal experience with some family member who sort of was, dabbling in this ideology, but came to it not really from a political place, but from a place of having a mental health crisis. And so when I was researching it, I learned about this crime, and it felt like I had a very personal access point because of my experience. It felt like something I could write, and it also just felt like really fertile ground to explore a lot of themes that I think, as you said, are really relevant today. There's how we deal with mental health. There's gun culture. There's, where are people getting information? And I think it, without excusing anything, it's a tragic story, and without excusing any of the actions of the Canes, I thought it was more interesting to try to dive into the motivations and sort of the how we got here, rather than sort of a flat just condemning, because I think that's the only way you can really sort of hope to, as a filmmaker, like spark discussion and hopefully try to find a way to prevent something like this from happening again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's very interesting too, the ideology as well. Obviously, it comes, I think, from a distrust within government and all of the rules and regulations that are set up to, in many cases, take people's money.
Yeah.
I think most of us go through life with this acceptance that we will pay taxes, and that's just the way it is. We don't tend to think so much about the why behind it. And then I think what happens is almost as a means to, like you said, and maybe to cope with either some sort of mental illness, or to justify or find in their mind a justification for why they just don't want to follow the rules anymore. They turn to this ideology that seems to justify, but there is no legal binding status of any kind that would allow for them to follow this. So why do people fall into this if they are going to be arrested or lead to worse things down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the film we try to put forward a few sort of answers to that. I don't know. I think it's a very complex issue. I'm not sure that I have the total sort of silver bullet answer to it, but I think it's a couple things, in my opinion. I think you have a lot of people who come to the movement from a place of financial desperation. Maybe they lost their house in the housing crisis in 2008, or they owe back taxes, or usually there's some sort of financial pressure. And that can be financial pressure plus some sort of mental health issue. It can be financial pressure plus just feeling, I think the one thing that a lot of them have in common is they feel let down and sort of preyed upon by the system. Maybe they didn't fill out their forms on their taxes right, and all of a sudden they owe interest and penalties and other things. It's a very complicated system that we just sort of live with. And for people who aren't really the most equipped to navigate that, you can really get tripped up and end up in some problems. So I think a lot of them had that experience. They felt preyed upon by the system. And then in the absence of, any sort of real social safety net or official kind of guidance, they fall prey to people with bad ideas. All of a sudden somebody comes around and says, "Hey, you don't have to pay that bill. Look here, this," and they, have this kind of pseudo legal jargon that they are kind of armed with. And I think you have a lot of people out of desperation that cling to that. And I think that's one aspect. I think, the community aspect is another thing. But I think, all of the people in the sovereign citizen and sort of adjacent movements that I've known and researched, they all share in common that, a distrust of government, a distrust of official systems,
Hmm.
and I think their pain in that is really valid. I think most of them really did experience something that was really traumatic and damaging to them. I just think that the answers that they're reaching for are unfortunately the wrong answers in this
Right.
circle.
Yeah. Now, in that particular case, do we know what the right answers would be for situations such as this?
I think in this particular case, you had a man who, I'm not the expert in this, but in my opinion,
Hmm.
I think that he had some sort of psychiatric issue. I think that it was probably a delusional disorder or, some sort of personality disorder. I think that he had multiple interactions with police before it escalated to this degree. He had a long, long history of this. There were multiple sort of uh, moments where there could have been intervention at an earlier stage. He was, his son was homeschooled. There was very little oversight over how that was going. So I think with a lot of these cases, whether it's this case in particular or these horrible stories about someone who shoots a school or does something else, there's usually, if you look back, there were a lot of places along the road where there could have been earlier intervention if there were sort of if there were a framework in place to deal with something like that. I think ultimately when somebody has a mental health issue, that with, you know, gun culture and a lack of sort of a social safety net or social resources, I think can lead to something like this. And so, maybe I don't have the full answer to that. It's a very complex problem, but what I'm hoping with this film is that it sparks a conversation and for people to think about those issues.
Yeah, no, it certainly got me thinking about it for sure. It also got me thinking a lot about like Nick Offerman and his choices in his career as of late. It seems like a lot of his choices tend to be about social issues that interest him, that he really wants to explore. And so I find that to be fascinating because, he's obviously made his career off of Parks and Rec. And I almost get the sense sometimes that he is doing everything he can to fight against that image. So whenever we see him in something like this or his bit role in The Last of Us, everyone's always saying, "Oh, it's against type for Nick Offerman." And it's because they're always thinking he's, Ron Swanson all the time.
Yeah.
But I would urge people to look at his choices in all these supporting and indie projects and other things that he's done, where he's really always, I think, fascinatingly pushing himself as an actor beyond to tap into something very meaningful for him on a personal level.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, without I can't speak for him directly, but he's a very well, he's a brilliant actor and he's a wonderful collaborator. And I think he's really interested in I think the father-son dynamic in this is obviously the was sort of the main interest for him, but I do think he thinks deeply about America. I think he thinks, I think he has I don't know. I can't speak to his sort of process, but I do know that that he's not dogmatic in his thinking. He's very humanistic and very empathetic. And I think that he tries to inhabit, like I guess all great actors, like they try to inhabit different perspectives, and clearly inhabiting these perspectives of people like this is something that's interesting to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it certainly is against type for people expecting Ron Swanson. Um, it's kind of, this character in a way is sort of like dark Ron Swanson, in real life. It's weird.
So I'm curious to know, coming from the world of shorts, this is your first feature film that you've directed. What was something that you were totally prepared for making the leap, and what was something that kind of came out of nowhere unexpectedly for you?
Boy, I felt prepared in the sense that I felt I really understood the material, having written it.
Hmm.
I felt prepared to talk about the characters and their I felt I really obviously knew the story because I had written it. The thing that I was not prepared for is, when you do a short film or a commercial or a video or something like that, you're shooting for a couple days. But even though our film was short, the shoot was pretty fast. I mean, I wasn't, I guess I wasn't prepared. The stamina it takes to do this sort of 25 days in a row was something I wasn't, that caught me off guard a little bit. You go into a shoot day, you have your plan, and then you say, okay, I have to do this for a month straight, and you kind of can't miss. Every little piece of a movie is super important. So you can't kind of have one piece that's not working.
I know some directors who will get in it, not like physically shredded, but they'll, walk the treadmill. They'll like try to get themselves physically psyched up because they
Yeah.
know then if they feel good physically, mentally, hopefully they'll be just as smart and sharp on set.
Yeah.
It is a grueling process. I would recommend anyone who's never been on a set before to give it a go and see how long you last.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of long days and weather. And, it was a sprint, but a very long sprint, a 25-day sprint.
So when you have a tense sequence like as you do in the third act of this movie, where you're dealing with special effects and a big action set piece, I mean, maybe not big in the big sense, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
big enough for this movie.
Yeah.
What does a day like that look like for you in terms of preparation?
Well, that's interesting. That was the most challenging part, I would say, of the whole film for me, because that sequence was supposed to be shot over 2.5 days, which is still very fast given
Yeah.
stuff we had to accomplish. But we shot in Northwest Arkansas, and we had lightning strikes on the first day that shut down our production completely. And because it was an independent film, we didn't have a studio. And by the time an insurance claim, the money would come in, everybody would be at home. So I had to shoot that sequence then in actually less than a day, the entire thing. So my plan that I had spent, all this time sort of crafting the plan of how I was going to do it, had to be condensed into a day, and I had to rethink the entire thing, the night before. And so that was the most stressful and kind of difficult part. But I think it turned out pretty good in the end.
Yeah. So I'm assuming, going back to the actors for a second here, I'm assuming Offerman was cast first.
He was, but they came together pretty quickly. I don't remember the exact sequence. It was either Nick or Dennis became attached first. I think it may have been Dennis first and then Nick, just the way that the sequencing worked out, or the official attachments. But the package that we went out with that came together pretty quickly, the core of it was Dennis and Nick and Jake.
Mhm.
And the three of them became involved sort of around the same time. I think for independent films, it went pretty fast. It was we were shooting after like a year basically of putting the movie together, which is really quick, I think.
I think so. That's very quick.
Yeah.
The reason why I asked that question though was, with bringing on Jacob and having him take on this role,
Mhm.
he's another one that I imagine someone who we all saw when he was very, very young on screen and is having to grow up before our very eyes through his projects that he's taken on. What did
Mhm.
he want to accomplish with taking on this part and through his performance in this?
Yeah, I think for Jake, this represented an opportunity to do something that was more adult. I think he's in that place in his, he just graduated high school.
Yep.
And I think he's in that place in his life. It's very similar to the character in this movie in terms of like it's a coming of age story. So he's in that transitional period. Um, I also think it's funny because the buzz cut that Jake has in the movie, I remember how nervous he was to shave his head in the beginning, and it's such a drastic look. So I think there was a kind of a fear there and a challenge there that maybe was something he was drawn to, but Jake really, his performance is very internal and quiet, but he completely embodies that character, and he went really deep with it, and I think just did I think it's an incredible performance.
I think so too. I mean, if anything, because we have such a relationship with him on screen over the years, I felt so attached to that character that it only underscored the tragedy of this
Yeah,
movie. Because I think that for a lot of us, we're kind of expecting the character to go another direction. And
yeah, yeah,
that's really heartbreaking to watch unfold.
yeah, yeah. I think it would be easy to kind of typecast that, the Joe Kane character is kind of a weird kid or something, somebody unrelatable. But I think Jake brings a relatableness to it and a humanity to it that really lets you connect with that character in an important way.
Yeah. At the end of the movie, not to get too much into spoiler territory here, but can you tell me what direction you gave Dennis Quaid for that final scene? I want to get an idea of what was maybe going through that character's mind, if you're willing to
Yeah.
discuss.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like you said, I've said this in almost every interview, but like my favorite films are films that ask questions rather than
Mhm.
try to give people an answer, and that can be frustrating sometimes. But I think with a movie like this that's dealing with such a complex issue, I can't presume to have the answer. Where there's not exactly a just a silver bullet kind of a point we're trying to make at the end of it. But I think if there is a broad point, it's to try to say, let's question the sort of hostility and the othering that we have towards people. It's a very fractured time in the country right now in the world. And, I think filmmaking is a great way to put you in somebody else's shoes for a moment. And so the message of the film is really about empathy. And it's
Mhm.
about, trying to see if we can approach some of these problems, even the most difficult problems, with a sense of compassion or empathy first. I think maybe that's the first step towards like opening up a real dialogue or a solution. And so, with Dennis's character, he sort of represents a very dogmatic black and white way of thinking about the world that, is I think really common with a lot of people. And I think the end of the movie is really about him questioning that when it becomes personal to him.
Yeah, I think so too. And to your point about filmmakers like indulging a little bit in like the messages of their movies, I think when it's a message like this, I think it's okay to let that be known explicitly for the world right now,
Yeah.
and not leave it open to interpretation. But
Yeah.
speaking of which, as far as future projects and what you got up on the horizon for you, first film in the can. Congratulations,
Thank you.
obviously.
Thank you.
What's next?
I'm working on a couple projects. It's I sort of work on a couple things at once and see which one sort of comes together. I've got another project. It's a true crime thing. I have another true story that's a little bit larger in scale that I'm working on. It's a period thing. Features mostly. So I hope to get another film together pretty soon.
Well, I would hope that if anybody checks this one out, they will see the promise there that you are putting forth, and they will hopefully give you the rocket ship, and off you go.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for your time here. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.